Financial leadership is changing. CFOs no longer record history. They make history. This podcast will help you become a better leader, strategic thinker, and digital visionary. Welcome to Secrets of Rockstar CFOs, the ultimate podcast for chief financial officers. Follow along as Jack McCullough engages in exciting chats with accomplished CFOs, learning how they overcame obstacles and positioned their companies for the future. Here's your host, Jack McCullough.
Well, welcome back, Rockstars. We're going to have a really fun and interesting episode today. Been looking forward to it for a little while. Please join me in welcoming Jen DiRico. Jen's the CFO of Commvault, which is a leading provider of cyber resilience, data security, and AI solutions. Since joining Commvault in 2024, Jen has been laser-focused on driving long-term durable growth initiatives to scale. She joined Commvault after 10 years at Toast, and we're going to explore that, where she played a key role in its expansion around the world and in its successful IPO. Jen, welcome to the Secrets of Rockstar CFOs.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be here.
Yeah, we're glad to have you. And Commvault's one of those companies, not yet a household name. The brand is certainly growing amongst CFOs, to say the least. A lot of our members know about it. But, for those who aren't super familiar with it, what can you tell us about the company?
Sure. So Commvault operates in the cyber resiliency space, but it's been around a long time. It started in a world of data protection, right? And ultimately, if you listen to our CEO, Sanjay, he says we've always protected data in a difficult world. Those challenges have just evolved over time, right? It used to be natural disasters, and now it's much more around cyber attacks. And so what we do, quite simply, is make sure that when you're attacked by a threat actor or a cyber attack, because in these days, it's a when, not an if, you can get back up and running. And so we protect your data, and we make sure that we can rebuild your environments, and we help you be truly cyber resilient, because cyber resiliency is the convergence between data protection and data security.
Okay, that makes a whole lot of sense. And we're definitely going to explore that in depth later. But before that, I want to, get our audience to know a little about your own background. So, and I know the answer to this, and I'm excited by the answer to this, but can you share where you grew up?
Yeah, I grew up in Waltham, Massachusetts.
Yes, and for those who aren't from Massachusetts, Jen grew up about 10 miles from me, probably. I grew up in Burlington, Massachusetts. We didn't exactly have a rivalry, a little bit, but who was your big high school rivalry?
So actually, I went to an all-girls school, Dana Hall in Wellesley, and so I didn't go to public school, but my rivalry in high school was Windsor, which is another all-girls school.
Oh, okay, yeah, no, for us it was Lexington and Woburn, so.
Yeah, sure.
We were often on the losing end of that rivalry. It wasn't much of one. So, but anyway, it's always fun to have a fellow Bay Stater. And so when you look back as a kid, what was the first job you ever had? Maybe as a teenager, not after graduating from college.
Yeah. So as a teenager, my dad has been in business for himself for a really long time. He runs a car wash. And so I actually worked at the car wash when I was 4. As soon as I could legally work there, I think it was 14 at the time, I worked towel drying cars.
Oh, really? Wow. That's pretty cool. Well, it's remarkable. And we've been doing this now, this year probably maybe like around the 75th episode.
Okay.
And it's remarkable how many CFOs have shared with me that their parents started or own their own businesses. And there might be something in the entrepreneurial gene that translates to children who are going to go on to become CFOs. So was your mother entrepreneurial too, or?
My mom was largely stay at home while we were growing up. She's a therapist now, went back to school when she was 50, got her degree, but very much an entrepreneurial, small business, like-minded family for sure.
Okay, cool. And then you made a very wise decision. You went to college at the University of Miami.
I did.
And we don't get a lot of people back when they move to South Florida. We're happy that you did. But we're probably unusual choices for fields of study at the time, but spectacular choices for CFO, because you got an undergraduate degree in entrepreneurship and leading and management, if I'm not mistaken. And then you got an MBA at Simmons, one of the best colleges in the game. Was there a vision that you would become, if not a CFO necessarily, maybe like a C-suite leader or something like that?
I'd like to say I'd give myself too much credit if I actually said I envisioned myself as a CFO. I always saw myself as a leader of something in the business world. And I think the entrepreneurship, back to your point around, did it run in the family? I had just always seen my dad kind of make it happen, right? From a small business perspective. And I knew I didn't want to be an accountant. Nothing against the accountants in the room, but I knew that wasn't my passion. But I wanted to make sure I had broad business experience. And that was one of the reasons I chose entrepreneurship. And leading people, regardless of what you do, is important.
Yeah, I mean, that and, financial analytics, there aren't a lot of better things you could study for the modern CFO job. I'm not like, I got my first CFO job some time ago. And, accounting was the best thing you could study back then. But, today it's almost like you're an accidental visionary with your educational choices.
Yeah, I wish I could say it was all purposeful, but I think there was a little bit of luck here, honestly. It just happened to work.
Well, there you go. So you finished up at Miami and got an MBA. What was your first job after school?
So my first job after my MBA was actually, a little bit of background. Between college and graduate school, I actually went into hospitality for a couple of years. And so I worked at a local country club as the function director. I did that for a couple of years and then realized, it was time for me to go back and get my MBA full time. While I loved the job, I knew I wanted a little bit different path. And so coming out of my MBA, given that background, I actually did a hospitality consulting work, which was a good blend of practical experience for a couple of years after school, plus the fact that, I had this MBA and I was trying to make that transition. So it allowed me to work for a small consulting firm that actually brought me to Italy for over a year. And I lived in Italy for a year and a half, supporting a small business, family-owned coffee concept that had 9 locations in Italy and a couple in London, where I helped them think through operations, financial modeling. They were thinking about doing some franchising. So it was a very general, good opportunity for me to dip my toes in a lot of different experiences.
That's interesting. Did you speak Italian prior to moving to Italy?
I did not, but a little bit of a fun fact. I spent almost every night when I wasn't working learning Italian on Rosetta Stone, because I was living in a really small town where there were only so many people who spoke English, very few actually. And so for me to make it work, I had to do a little bit of learning on the fly.
Yeah, if you went to Rome or someplace like that,
maybe
probably find enough people. Some of them might not want to help the American that didn't bother to try, but
this was also over 15 years ago, and I think there's been a lot of evolution since then, but definitely not. English was definitely not top of the list for a lot of people at the time.
No, and that makes a lot of sense. And you've had a great career, but I want to focus a little bit on your second most recent job first, just because you worked, you may or may not know this, but Elena keynoted our conference last year.
Oh, wonderful. Yeah, she's a good friend and a mentor of mine, actually. So that's great.
I only know her mostly from that experience. I mean, I know her by reputation because everybody knows her by reputation. But, clearly, a big coup to get her to come from the Silicon Valley to be CFO of Toast. But you had a great run at Toast. You joined as the manager of FP&A, and you grew to VP of Finance and SVP and General Manager of International at Toast, instrumental in an IPO. I'd love you to take us through that journey, what you learned, some of the key lessons, because it was the ride of a lifetime. Hopefully you'll have another ride of a lifetime, but it was quite a ride.
Let me just tell you, I am incredibly grateful for the experience. And when I joined Toast, I'd love to say I had this vision. It was going to be this amazing ride. Honestly, I didn't really think about it. What I did know is I knew about the product, right? Because go back to my hospitality days in hospitality, I knew there's a market for the software and the technology. And then I also knew I wanted to work with people that could challenge me and that were fun to be around. And Toast really checked all those boxes. And the job itself was great in terms of my experience. What happened over the course of almost 10 years at Toast, first, I couldn't have dreamed it to happen. Honestly, it was a life-changing experience for me. But I had the opportunity to build a finance team from the ground up, really think through what true business partnering means. And I think that's one of the reasons I lean heavily into the FP&A and the strategic finance side now, because that's really where I cut my teeth learning the business. A key lesson for me was it's not about putting numbers in boxes per se, but it's really understanding how a department works, how the business model works. What is the why behind the numbers? And for me, one of the biggest things I took from Toast was you can tell a real good story if you understand the business and the numbers. And that is a powerful skill from a finance perspective. Not only did I have ability to build the finance team from the ground up, I also had an opportunity to lead the company through the IPO. Elena joined kind of towards the end of that process. So I had an opportunity to really lean in there. Then post IPO, I led investor relations and strategic finance and treasury and FP&A and strategic finance. And so really understanding what good, strong public company operations looks like from a finance perspective and how that is different than, raising 4 or 5 fundraising rounds as a startup, right? Different muscles, but all incredibly important. And then lastly, spent some time outside of finance, which I credit for being one of the reasons I think I'm a pretty good CFO now, is because I actually took time outside the finance team and had to really own the number. And so I led our international operations, started that business from zero to we had no locations when we were there. And then, when I left, it was north of 2,000 or so in terms of number of locations. So a lot of progress and ultimately really responsible for the full P&L. What I liked most about that part of the job, though, was it stretched me because I had to lead leaders that I couldn't do their jobs. And all throughout finance, it was much more I could do the job of a lot of my teammates and my peers. But in the general manager of international, that was different. I'd never carried a quota, never built a product. I wasn't a product person or a technologist, but ultimately allowed me to hone my skills on what are the questions and how do I lead, right? And so for me, Toast was an amazing experience that realistically could happen over someone's 30-year career that I got in the less than 10 years. So I continue to say Toast changed my life, and I'm incredibly humbled to have been part of their story.
Yeah. So I picked the right company to focus on your pre-Commvault days, it sounds like. So.
You picked the right company.
But it's interesting because I remember when Elena was hired because search firms, as they tend to do, they reached out to me to ask if they knew anyone who was looking. And, clearly they were going for a big fish and, clearly, okay, what you're going for, you're looking for the person to take them public within 6 to 18. So, but you, had that whole thing of building it not from zero, but, from a very early stage to where it was IPO ready. So, thinking along, who are some of the key people that you worked with in terms of mentors or formal or informal, just people who really impacted the way you approach your job as a leader today?
Yeah. So I have to say, I've had a lot of people along the way, but I have to credit kind of 2 people. The former CEO of Toast, Chris Comparato, he absolutely took a chance on me time and time again. In fact, allowed me to be serve as quote unquote the interim CFO during a period of a lot of change during COVID, all the way almost up until the IPO. Right, that was a life-changing opportunity. And from a leadership perspective, he always led with positive intent. He always took a chance on people who he believed in, even though on paper that I did not have all the experience. And I think that's a big testament for me in terms of when I think about people and their potential, right? Those who really are hungry, they want to try hard, that they mean well, that goes a long way. The other person, as I would say, is Elena Gomez. She is the reason I can sit here and talk to you today as a CFO, not only from a technical perspective, but she really, she pushed me to think differently, how finance shows up at the table, right? How you can be a strategic leader, how you can move the business forward. I would say to you, I owe a big part of my career to her, just in a matter of meeting her 5 years ago.
Oh, that's great. And yeah, by reputation, she's all of those things. So that's great. So you had a great run at Toast. And it must have been a very difficult decision. You had the opportunity at Commvault, which, if I have my facts correct, is your first ever CFO job. And so can you share with us how that opportunity came about and, what that decision process looked like when you decided to move on from Toast to Commvault?
It's an understatement to tell you that it was a hard decision for me because I like to tell people when I was at Toast, I bled orange. I believed completely in the mission, and because Toast colors are orange. And I believed in the mission, the product. I had grown so much at the company. I'd learned so much. And always had, and this is a conversation Elena and I had a lot, was I want my chance to be a public company CFO. And that's a hard thing to get when you are not a sitting public company CFO. And so I wasn't actively looking, but I was passively kind of considering what was out there. And a recruiter who had the job for Commvault reached out. And I will be totally honest with you, I did not know Commvault. I didn't know the brand. But what I did know is that in the time that I had participated in the audit committee meetings at Toast, from the early days all the way through, one thing has changed. The conversation around, are we prepared if there's a cyber attack? What will we do around making sure that our business continues to respond? God forbid something happens. In the early days, that wasn't a conversation at all. But in the last probably 2 years, it was top of list, right? Risk was top of list in terms of cyber attacks and threats, just like many boards, right? Many boards, many audit committees. And so for me, that told me that this was a very interesting space. It's a very relevant space. And then I did a little bit more digging into the company. Commvault has had a long history, but over the last couple of years, they've done a lot of great work in terms of transitioning a business model, reinvigorating growth, right? All the while being incredibly profitable. And so for me, at the highest level, when I looked at, well, you have a growing TAM, a very relevant product, solving a strong customer, a big customer need, and also growing, I thought, well, this is something I should consider. And so I had a lot of conversations. And what I was most drawn to was the impact I could have. Commvault was looking to reinvigorate growth. And that's a very different DNA than, your steady type company. And what I thought I could bring was, how do we make sure that we can respect and balance all the great work that's happened at Commvault for so long, but then also invigorate and inspire additional growth driving initiatives? That's a different risk appetite, right? Sometimes that requires different skill sets as well. And so I really thought I could add some value. And ultimately, I just crossed my year anniversary. I think it was 2 days ago officially. And it's been an amazing year, let me tell you.
Well, happy anniversary. So,
Thank you.
yeah, that's pretty good timing. Well, it sounds like, from what you're telling me, it sounds like it was a great choice. And, one of the things by reputation, my preparing for this is you're way up there in terms of CFOs who really understand generative AI. There's not that many of us out there who do. But how are you using generative AI, within your work as a CFO, as opposed to, how the customers might be using it? We'll get to that separately.
Sure. So on my end as a CFO, I'm using it as an extension of how I think and work. What does that mean? I'm using AI to help pressure test my decisions, of course, draft my communications, model trade-offs, sharpen my narratives, right? Especially in a timeline when, Commvault's a really high growth company and I'm looking to do a lot and I'm trying to move quickly. But at the same time, AIs can be a great partner, right? It's not a substitute to other partners, but for me, I feel like I've been able to progress decision-making, scenario planning options faster than I would have in the past if I hadn't kind of engaged with it. And then from a team perspective, I think Commvault's in the early innings on this, but I am absolutely pushing my teams to say, how are you leveraging AI from a model perspective? How do we find efficiencies in terms of even like things down to headcount reconciliations? And how do we think about drafting decks quicker, right? And ultimately getting people to do more thinking versus copy and pasting and creating formulas.
Well, one thing about, with you as sort of this visionary around generative AI, I know the question comes up a lot, can AI take the place of humans? And it can take the place of processes, but you're not on the side of, yes, it can take the place of humans, as I understand it. But how do you see AI becoming a useful part of the corporate finance function and, in a way that works with humans as opposed to replacing humans?
Absolutely. So I am of the mindset that AI is only going to make our jobs easier and faster, and we have to. But I don't believe it's going to replace humans, at least in the corporate finance side of things. However, I think the way we work will change. For example, I like to give the example much earlier on in my career as an analyst. I spent a heck of a lot of time doing headcount reconciliation and creating one model from a revenue perspective or the waterfall revenue. And I think in the future, the analyst is no longer going to have one model. They're going to be training 3 or 4 different agents to help them do the modeling effectively. And so I think it will change it will be how you interact with the AI agent, right? As opposed to, did you actually create the model yourself? And so ultimately, I think you're going to find, I think we can all agree, a lot of efficiencies. But I actually believe the finance teams that embrace this will be better finance teams. They'll be able to have higher output, stronger decision-making, and ultimately be embedded in the business more because they will not be time spent doing variance analysis and all the things that take up so much time in the beginning of the month or the beginning of the quarter. That will be a quick thing where you can get back to the business to understand, what can I actually do to push decision-making and strategic intent?
Yeah. It's interesting because every technology wave, people say it's going to eliminate jobs. I remember when in high school, when I said I was going to study accounting, smart people, told me I should never do that because computers would replace accountants in 5 years. And as smart as they were, they couldn't have been more wrong. In fact, if anything, computers have empowered accountants.
Right.
I don't have a crystal ball, but I have a feeling it's going to change work, but it's not going to replace work. So
No, I don't think so. I think it's going to make the work different, right? I think the most important thing is how do we train our people and our teams to embrace and make sure that they can be successful in the workforce.
that makes a lot of sense. So I want to ask you a question. You're with one of the hottest private companies in the game because, Commvault's in a great position. It's one of the most visible companies out there. But still, the capital markets are tricky, even for a company as well positioned as yours. So I'm wondering, what advice can you have for CFOs who are, maybe dealing with a constantly changing private capital market scenario for the first time in their careers?
Yeah. So I think it goes back to truly understanding the market you serve and being able to quantify that very clearly. In the public markets, I get a lot of questions around what is the TAM and how does that support your growth over the long term? So that would be the first thing I would say. And then the second thing is around, if you aren't public, you still should start to act like a public company regardless, because I think there are certainly, in terms of how do you report, how do you think about supporting your investor base, right? Anything around telling the story from a narrative perspective, there are just good hygiene that I think is really important regardless of stage of company. And that's hard to do if you're really early on, but I think it's a good part to get your teams focused on strong operating cadences, right? Operating rhythms are incredibly important, regardless of what stage you are as a company.
That it makes a whole lot of sense. But one thing I like having CFOs who are not CPAs on the podcast, and I'm a CPA, or I was at one point. But I always like to get a feel. What are some of your favorite KPIs or benchmarks that you use to assess and report financial performance? You're nodding your head, so I think you've got some good ones. So.
Well, it's more that it's so funny when you think about KPIs, right? Like it's not those, they're actually not the P&L metrics. So those are important: revenue growth, gross margin, EBIT, those are fine. But for me, it's about leading indicators around the growth. So for us at Commvault, it's the type of inflow. How much inflow are we seeing? What is the average revenue per account? How many net new accounts are we bringing in? What's the lifetime value versus CAC dynamic? What's the payback on those customer? And then overall, I really pay a lot of attention, and it's a little lagging, but the net new ARR that we're adding to the platform, I think that is a signal of long-term growth.
Okay. Those are some good ones. It's funny because I mentioned I'm a CPA, and I actually had a boss. He would not let me report according to generally accepted accounting principles. So he used to say GAAP is crap. And I won't say who it is, but there's a reasonably good chance that you know him because we've played in the same circles. Although he's retired now. Yeah, GAAP is crap is what he used to tell me. I
can't say I totally disagree.
He had a valid point, but I mean, a rules-based system for reporting inherently has value. But
is absolutely important. Absolutely.
But yeah, GAAP is crap. I just picture this guy's probably writing poetry in his retirement right now. So, but speaking of CEOs, you're lucky. You work for one of the better ones. You mentioned Sanjay earlier, and he, great brand, great thinker, great visionary. But the role between the CEO and the CFO has become a true partnership in recent years rather than just saying it's a true partnership. Yep. And I say that because more and more CEOs are the ones telling me. When CFOs used to tell me, I'd be like, yeah, sure. But now CEOs are saying it. So it's probably true. But how do you build that, that true strategic partnership with Sanjay?
Yeah. So again, listen, it's a process, right? First of all, I'm lucky to work with someone who's so open to building a relationship. And that was one of the reasons I thought I could be successful at Commvault. So for Sanjay and I, it's all about building trust, honesty, and then learning from one another, right? And then when I first got to Commvault, I wanted to learn about the product, his vision around for innovation, how does AI play into that? And so in the beginning, it was a lot about, I wanted him to teach me about Commvault because I was so new. And on the flip side, right, there's an element of growth from a strategic finance and an FP&A perspective. And so I think there's an element of what can we learn from each other, but also inherent trust that we each have our swim lanes, right? Also, and understanding where those swim lanes are is incredibly important, I think, because then you understand, like what's the subject matter expertise I can bring to the table versus what he can. And then we can bounce these ideas off. We think differently, which I think is incredibly important for this for a CEO and a CFO dynamic, because you think about different risks, you think about growth a little bit differently as well, and where you're willing to make trade-offs. And so for me, a partnership, any good partnership starts with trust and a heck of a lot of communication regular communication, right? More communication, the better. But I feel very fortunate to have Sanjay as a CEO and a partner.
Now, there's a lot of talk about it. And Accenture, actually, a couple of years ago, they thought that within the C-suite, that was the most important partnership. Other partnerships and relationships could, survive a little bit of dysfunction. But if those two aren't on the same page, doesn't mean they have to be, hanging out together on the weekends or golfing or whatever. But business-wise, if they're not on the same page and when their disagreements aren't respectful, the whole company is going to suffer for that. So it's great you seem to have that type of relationship.
We have a great relationship.
So I want to talk to you because one of my early CFO jobs, I worked in the cybersecurity space.
Okay.
Different game today, to say the very least. But, one thing that I think is probably true is you're working with engineers, some of the smartest, some of the most innovative ones. Yet at the same point, your customers want rock solid reliability. So, you're sitting here as a CFO. How do you balance the financial risks that are associated with innovation, keeping your product ahead of the game, having an innovative culture, but at the same time, you're responsible for mitigating risks with all of your stakeholders. Do you have an active role in that?
It's a great question, and it's one we debate internally a lot. But I think if we go back to, and this is I credit Sanjay for setting the right tone here. Our primary goal is to keep customers' data safe. When a customer comes to us, right, and they've been impacted by a threat actor, right, they're in a really bad place. They need us to help them drastically. And we have one job to do in that instance. And so as it relates to, we're a company steeped in engineering and innovation. And also we have been very clear that ultimately our first priority is to ensure we can bring customers' life data and companies back to life. And so that is priority number 1, 2, and 3. And so as we think about balancing risk, we go back to what is our first principles. And then outside of that, of course, we need to engage with innovation. But I'll give you a great example. AI, right? One of our tenets of AI is we use AI to make customers' lives easier and make their recoveries faster, right? So we're not looking to play in a space that is inherently more dangerous. It's all about how can we go back to our number one principle of protecting customers' data in a very difficult world. And so when I have those conversations with our engineering team, I'm very fortunate because our teams know that. They inherently know that that's first principle. But ultimately, I have to make sure that as the steward of risk here, right, I have to make sure that we're consistently making sure that is top of mind.
Yes, steward of risk. I'm stealing that phrase from you. But that's great. And another change in the space since I was there, data protection, it's still job one, but it was probably the only job we actually had in the cyberspace, right? I remember our ads showed like a soccer goalie blocking a ball. It's like what happens when you get hacked with top layer networks. And then it was the soccer thing and it said absolutely nothing, which was actually a mistake because then every hacker took it as a challenge. But the stuff held up. But now, data is a little different than it was just then. It's people are actually extracting business value from data. They're not just storing it. So how are you evolving your business model to capture the value, analytics, AI, and all of the data-driven services that might be available?
It's a great question, but I would go back to our first principle of we protect customers' data. Mm-hmm. And so nothing with that data, we don't leverage the customer's data in any way. We don't use it from an analytics perspective, no monetization or anything like that. Because at the end of the day, like customers trust us with their data. We are the last line of defense, right? Now, having said that, from an overall, how do we think about leveraging an AI, right? We think about it a couple of ways. How can we make sure that customers can come back to life very quickly using AI, right? And how can we learn more from just what makes customers stronger in terms of how do they leverage certain partners from an AI perspective? But ultimately, while we protect a lot of data, there's no monetization and we don't use customers' data in any way, shape, or form.
No, that's great. We're a little bit in the home stretch. So we'll resume the normal conversation now. But you have a lot going on, growing company, CFO. It's just a busy, busy job. But, all work and no play makes Jack a dull boy or Jen a dull girl in this case. Do you have any interesting hobbies or things that you do outside of work to kind of, maintain a good work-life balance?
Yeah, I like to think about it as work-life integration versus work-life balance. However, I will tell you, I'm pretty active. So in the winter, I ski a lot. We have a place in Vermont, so I go there a lot. And in the summer, I actually love to mountain bike. I'm also a runner. And then when I want to just chill, I love to read a good book. You couple that with some good dinners with my husband, and life is pretty good, actually. Like, even though it's really busy, I do try my best most weeks to find some balance. The week of earnings, a little tough. How's that? But I try.
Yeah, there's just a reality of being a CFO for a company like Commvault that, it's not like 9 to 5. But, if you want,
No, it's 9 to 5.
yeah, you may have made different career choices, because for people who want a 9 to 5 living, those jobs still do exist, just not in your space. So, but no, that's
And
great.
I think it's a lot of fun, actually. I will say I'm biased, but I love the job, and I have enough balance, I would say.
Yeah, well, good for you. Yeah, sports are just the greatest balance, right? I mean, there's so much research that people who are active are better in their jobs and whatnot. Just, it helps your energy, helps your self-confidence, and just, gives you that all critical psychological break. So, but cool. But I'd love to chat next. And you've had a great run, seen some different things with some different sorts of companies. How do you see the CFO role, and maybe even the nature of financial leadership itself, evolving over the next few years?
Yeah, I think you're going to continue to see the same type of trajectory where the CFOs have become far more operational and far more strategic. It's no longer just a back office function. And I think you see the difference between certain CFOs that are more back office versus more involved in the business on a regular basis. I think that's where the market is going. I think that's where we need it. I also would say most of the CFOs I talk to these days are really leaning into how can they be a voice in the room from a strategic perspective, which I often find, sometimes I sit back and I watch my team discuss, and if I'm quiet, there's a clear voice missing in the room, and not just because it's me, but just there's a definite view that a CFO brings from a strategic and a business impact, and even a customer impact oftentimes. And so I think over time, you're going to continue to see that take shape. And it's only going to accelerate, in my view, when we can continue to leverage AI.
Does make a lot of sense. So cool. And, we tend to have a youngish listening group, according to the analytics. And a lot of our listeners are in that pre-CFO category. It wasn't so long ago that you were in that crowd still.
Not long ago at all, actually. So,
the VPs of finance and controllers and chief accounting officers who, might be short-time CFOs. And I'm wondering, what advice would you give them to continue on, do their job great, but get that CFO opportunity when it's available, and then crush it when they have the opportunity?
Yeah. So I would say continue to raise your hand, continue to ask for more, step outside of your comfort zone, continue to understand the business, right? The best CFOs out there understand not just the numbers, but the why behind the numbers and the business and the operational impact. So make sure you build relationships outside of finance. I think my job outside of finance was probably one of the reasons I can be a good CFO. So don't underestimate the power of understanding the business and not just the numbers, and raise your hand for every opportunity, because I truly believe that's what got me here.
I think that is absolutely fantastic advice. Look forward to following your career journey over the next few years. And with that, Jen, I'd just like to give you the final word today.
So I would say when we think about AI, the value of finance isn't just precision, it's perspective. And I think AI is going to supercharge the questions we ask. And our job is not to fear that disruption, it's to operationalize it.
Thank you for listening to this episode. To continue your exploration of this role that focuses on strategy, leadership, finance, and technology, listen to more episodes of the show at rockstarcfos.com. Join this revolution, episode by episode. Push yourself to achieve great things and unlock the best opportunities available to you. CFOs are creating a legacy, and it's time for you to leave your own unique imprint on the world today. That's all for now. See you on the next one.